This is Professor Melanie Hildebrandt. This video is the third in a series of videos from Chapter 3 where I'm talking about how changes impact our markets. This is a more complex situation, which is what our real markets and our economies are more like, where we have something that we call simultaneous shifts of supply and demand. One really important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about simultaneous shifts is that simultaneous shifts of supply and demand are only going to happen if you have two events that occur at the same time, hence the name simultaneous shifts. So, for example, in your problem set or on questions that you're working through, it's only going to be a simultaneous shift. So you're only going to change supply and demand if two events occur. The first that impacts supply and the second that impacts demand. So let's think back to the example from the first two videos. We're looking at the market for pencils, and I just went ahead and drew some basic graphs out here. So another thing to keep in mind with simultaneous shifts is it's really helpful, I think. I'm going to recommend that you draw two graphs. Okay, so I have graph 1 here and graph 2. And I've just labeled some generic equilibrium price and quantity. So instead of 3 and 10,000 like I was saying before, now equilibrium is simply P1 and Q1. And so you notice I still have P1 and Q1 in my second graph as well. So if we go back to the examples for pencils, let's suppose that impacting the market for pencils, we have a decrease in consumer income. So step 1, what side of the market is impacted? Well, that would be demand. And so if income goes down, demand's going to go down. And so I'm going to draw a decrease in demand in both graphs. Okay. Thinking of supply, suppose there's a increase in the cost of that input resource of graphite. So that's going to cause production costs to go up, which causes our supply to decrease also. So we're going to be showing demand and supply decreasing in both of our graphs here. Okay. The difference is in the first graph, I'm going to let the change in demand be much larger, and in the second graph, I'm going to let the change in supply be the larger change. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. So demand is going to decrease, so we're shifting towards the origin, okay, like to this line here, okay, D2, and supply is going to decrease also, but not as much, so maybe here to S2, okay, and if that happens, where the two new curves meet is my new equilibrium, so I'm going to label this P2 and Q2. So in my new equilibrium, my equilibrium price decreased, my equilibrium quantity decreased also. Okay, moving over to graph 2, this time I'm going to let supply change more. So my decrease in supply happens like this, and it's a little messy here. I'm running out of space to S2. Okay, and then my demand doesn't decrease as much, D2. My new equilibrium price, so my price actually went up, okay, while my quantity still decreased. So what would an economist say about this? Well, what we would say is if in a market demand and supply both decrease at the same time, we can say with certainty that quantity is going to decrease. What's uncertain is what's going to happen to price. Okay, it depends on the relative shifts. If demand decreases more, price will go down. If supply decreases more, then price will go up. And so you might see some multiple choice questions in your My Econ lab or on your final exam that have you try to figure out what's happening with a simultaneous shift. So again, my recommendation is that you draw your two graphs, clearly labeling what's happening to equilibrium in each, and then you should be able to determine the correct response.